The AIGA Connecticut chapter would like to thank the School of Communications at Quinnipiac University and Professor Patty Bell Hastings for hosting our in-person event and social. Here's the breakdown of our event tonight. Stefan will give a 50-minute presentation. We will follow up with a Q&A session for about 30 to 40 minutes. After the event, we will announce the in-person raffle winners for some extra goodies, compliments of the School of Communications at Quinnipiac University. And also the AIGA Connecticut chapter will lead the community meeting announcements. So anyone interested should stick around. The complimentary portfolio review raffle winners with Stefan will be announced over the next few days. With no further ado, I would like to introduce Stefan Bucher. Stefan is the author of 7 books on a range of topics, including 344 Questions, The Creative Person's Do-It-Yourself Guide to Insight, Survival, and Artistic Fulfillment, and All Access, The Making of 30 Extraordinary Graphic Designers. He's also the creator of the online drawing series Daily Monster. Stefan launched his career as an art director at the advertising agency Whedon & Kennedy in Portland, Oregon. After that, he worked as a designer and art director at Madonna's Maverick Records. For the past 25 years, Stefan has worked under the 344 Design banner, working for clients like Saks Fifth Avenue, NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, and a host of artists, musicians, and directors. These days, he specializes in designing books for corporate and private clients. Hello, Stefan. So glad you can join us in sharing what's been going on in your world. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I hope you can see me and hear me. And I wish I could be there with you in person, but I'm glad that I get to zoom in. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm going to, just so that some of you may know me, and in that case, thank you for coming. And some of you may not know me, in which case, thank you especially for coming. And I'll show you a little bit of a portfolio reel, so you have a little bit of an idea whether you should take anything that I say at face value or not.
Holding me back, gravity's holding me back. I want you to hold out the palm of your hand. Why don't we leave it at that? Nothing to say, but everything gets in the way. Seems you cannot be replaced, and I'm the one who will stay. Oh, oh, oh. In this world, it's just us. You know it's not the same as it was. In this world, it's just us. You know it's not the same as it was. As it was. You know it's not the same. Answer the phone. You know you're no good alone. Why are you sitting at home on the floor? What kind of pills are you on? Ringing the bell, and nobody's coming to help. Your daddy lives by himself. He just wants to know that you're well. Oh, oh, oh. In this world, it's just us. You know it's not the same as it was. In this world, it's just us. You know it's not the same as it was. As it was. You know it's not the same as it was. As it was. As it was.
So hello again. Thank you for checking that out. And here we Yeah, it's been an interesting few years. Um, about what you're looking at there, what you were just looking at there represents about, over 2 decades of work. And I was always super invested in them. I was hustling constantly. Um, and then about 4 years ago, I kind of crashed. I'd worked extremely hard, and there were some changes in my personal life and, in the people around me and my family. And all of a sudden, I kind of came to a grinding halt and was like, what am I doing? And then a few months after that, the pandemic started. So I got to do all that stewing in my own juices. And I had a lot of time to think about graphic design, what it means to me, what maybe it means in general. And what I'm hoping to do today is to give you kind of the result of my thinking and to maybe give you something that's helpful. So, 7 things to make your life easier. Because as I'm sort of thinking about what do I want to do with my practice and what do I want to do personally, I'm interested in all of us making new and more interesting mistakes. And so I think one thing that I can contribute is to let you know some of the things where I stepped into a pothole so you don't have to step into the same pothole, or maybe if there are things on this list that maybe you hadn't thought about or you hadn't thought about in this particular way, and I can get you to a point where you don't make the same mistakes I made for quite as long, then I think that's a net positive. So the first and most important thing, and the thing that's sort of the overarching principle of everything I'm going to talk about today, is know your why. Why do you do what you do? Do you have awareness of why you do what you do? And I thought I did. For many, many years, I thought I did. And I don't know that I was necessarily wrong or unaware, but also things can change. So for the longest time, I thought, I love graphic design. It's my first love. It's the thing that I always come back to. It's the thing that makes me feel safe and competent and powerful. And then about 4 years ago, when things were changing around me in my life, I all of a sudden realized, oh, it's not, I don't love graphic design. I love people and I love puzzles. And graphic design was a puzzle that let me connect with people. And so that was the driving force, is that I would do all the stuff that you saw in that opening montage was me doing something in an attempt to connect with people. To go, oh, hey, look at this cool thing that I made. Can I, is this enough where you'll talk to me? This is all sort of early childhood stuff where it's like, oh, like I made a drawing and now, am I cool enough to talk to you guys? And so when I realized that, all of a sudden, it changed my relationship to graphic design, where before everything was very, very heavy and very like, oh my God, no, it has to be this particular font and it has to be this particular color. Because I was really convinced that if I could just come up with the perfect design, produced pristinely and printed, with the perfect PMS color at exactly the right density, then some golden door would unlock where I could feel the sense of belonging and acceptance, but I really had to earn that. And when I realized, oh, it's, I kind of realized, oh, I'm on the wrong train heading in the wrong direction. And so that changed how I approached it. And then I was like, oh, it's still clearly important to me, but how? And so that's what I mean when I say know your why. Is that it became clear, it came to my conscious awareness that I love people and I want to connect with people and I love puzzles. And so design was always a great puzzle. And then also working with people as a puzzle. And coming up now, the way I look at it is, oh, here's a puzzle that I can help you solve, or here's a puzzle that I'll solve for you. And that's given me a whole different way of relating to people, of relating to the work that I do. Where now, if a client comes to me and says, well, we like this, but can we change the font, or can we have the logo bigger, or whatever, like insert your anxiety cliche. I'm like, yeah, of course. Let me figure out how we can do this in a way that all hangs together. But then it's just part of the puzzle, and the process has become more important to me than being very, very fixated on executing one particular vision. And so I think in design, but in everything I do in my life, now I try to figure out, what's my why? Why am I doing this? Why is this important to me? Why do certain things really set me off or really make me feel very emotionally engaged, positively or negatively? And as soon as I can get, or to any degree that I can get awareness of that, it's made my life so much easier. The second thing is, I found it to be really helpful to define success. Because based on not really knowing my why, or being a little bit unclear, a little bit sort of spongy on that, I kept moving my own goalposts. Oh, well, I want to have a job in graphic design. Well, okay, I had that. Well, then I had this job in graphic design. I'm like, well, I want to win some awards. Okay, and then I did that. Or I wanted to have, I remember when I was starting out, I wanted to have a billboard on Sunset Boulevard out here in Los Angeles. And then that happened. And so it just the goals kept moving. And it's really helpful to write something down, to say, here are my goals. And the goals can change and the goals can evolve. And as you reach certain goals, you can have new ones, and you can, and the goalposts do have to move, because you don't get that sort of Hollywood ending where you reach state finals and then the end credits roll. And I've spent years waiting for that because I thought that's how it works. So I found it helpful to write some things down and to say, at this particular moment, this is what I think success looks like. So that then when I reach that point, I can actually take a minute and say, oh, here's a thing I wanted. And that is currently happening, or that has just happened. And then I can celebrate that, and I can say, okay, I can draw a line under that, or now decide where to go from here. Because otherwise, in the sort of hustle culture that is all around us, it's very easy to just move the goalposts at the same speed that you're moving forward. So it always seems like you're running in place. And that's how it felt for me anyway. And so that's a kind of a recipe for misery, because it's like I'm working all the time, it's just nothing's happening, and I just never feel like I'm getting anywhere. And every once in a while, I usually do it around my birthday or around the new year, and I'll write down goals for the next year. And sometimes I look back, and sometimes it takes me 5 years to achieve the goals that I've set for that particular year. But looking back, I have a list that goes back to, I think, 2003, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I did that, I did that, I did that. And that actually has helped me be a lot more serene around certain things. And then there are things where I go, oh, you know what? I set that goal a while ago and I haven't reached it. And having it in a written form, I can say, okay, does this goal still matter to me? Because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I used to care about that. I don't care about it now. Or I can go, oh yeah, I sort of forgot about that. Or I lost sight of it. How do I get back to that? So it's just a helpful tool. Again, it's about awareness. I don't know if you can hear the noise. I keep trying to hit the button, but I need to actually click physically on Zoom. Protect your money is a big one in this, because it's good to know your why. It's good to have goals, but then you also have to have the space to do something about it. And we don't talk a lot about money, I feel like, in graphic design, certainly not in these talks. People sort of dance around it a little bit. And I'll say right now, during the Q&A, if you want to ask me about concrete figures of, oh, how much was this job, or how much do you charge and stuff like that, I will not dance around it, and I will not give you a bullshit answer, because I'm tired of seeing that in talks. And I think it's super important for us to have some degree of transparency as an industry, because I think the opaqueness of charging and fee structures and negotiation are something that hurts all of us. We're not an industry, with the way we're structured in terms of every job being different, where we can do collective bargaining like actors and writers can do. For example, there's a Writers Guild strike coming up again. So I think the most powerful thing we can do is just understand what we're all doing, so that we can all learn from each other, and we can get a floor into our finances. Side note. So you may notice that I'm saying here, protect your money. Don't save your money. Because that's easy to say, oh, save your money. And then you might say, well, I have no money to save because there's so little coming in that everything that comes in immediately goes out for rent and food and insurance and all that kind of stuff. So what I mean by protect your money is, first of all, ask for it when you're negotiating for a job, when you're negotiating for, if that's a staff job or if it's a freelance job. Ask. Don't negotiate against yourself. I work with so many designers in my peer group, younger designers, and I see people constantly negotiate against themselves. It drives me crazy. And I used to do it too. And it's that thing of like, oh, I want you to like me, right? Like I was doing the work for people to like me. And so I was like, oh, I just want you to love the stuff, because if you love the stuff, then by extension, you kind of love me. And so if I charge too much money, you're going to like me less. And so don't do that. And then make a good contract. If you can at all afford it, I would highly recommend investing in talking to a lawyer once to go over your contracts, or to make it a good contract. And then get a good accountant. Even if you just get an accountant for 1 year to set up a good spreadsheet for you. I had an accountant set up a spreadsheet for my billing and everything 20 years ago. It's just a dumb old Excel spreadsheet that I've been using this entire time, and it's saved my bacon any number of times. And then if you should be in the fortunate position of having a little bit of excess cash, put it somewhere where it does what you want it to do. For me, I'm boring. I have my money in mutual funds, what I have saved, my retirement money, so that it doesn't get eaten up by inflation. And this year's been crap in the stock market, but so it just, you set it and forget it. That's what works for me. There are people who are more aggressive. There are people who are less aggressive. Again, try to gain awareness and clarity about what matters to you and what your risk tolerance is and all that kind of stuff. And then protect your money to the degree that it makes you comfortable and it makes you feel empowered when you're dealing with people. because that's the point, is to create space for points 1 and 2. Is that when you've reached an understanding of what you want to achieve, you have the breathing room where you don't have to ideally say yes to anything that comes through the door. And I've had many, many years like that. It was like, oh man, I have ideals of what I want to achieve, and I have ideals of what I'd like to work on or who I'd like to work with. But there wasn't the money. And so if the phone rang and somebody said, well, here's a job that you know is going to be terrible, I would look at it and go, yeah, that's going to be a huge cluster, but it's the job that's available to me right now, so that's the one I'll do. And so my goal with money has always been to create a little bit of a buffer. Respecting your body is a big one, and that goes right into what I was saying about creating a buffer. I've spent decades mortgaging my health, where I would work all night, every night. I'd work till 5, 6, 7, 8 a.m. in the morning, sleep until 2, do it all again. Because then I would have, I would have a little bit of serenity at night, and I could get a lot of stuff done. And I was proud of it. And it was very much, oh, look at how hard I'm working, which was a mixture of bravado and despair. I was sort of selling my bad time management and my procrastination as design machismo, and that wasn't great. And I really, over the years, paid the price for it. And so, to the degree that you're able, listen to what your body is telling you. And I was talking with a friend recently who was sort of in a similar space, and she said that somebody gave her advice that I thought was very good, that if your thinking is, should I just power through this and then rest? The answer is rest immediately. Because I've spent many cycles, and these were cycles that went over months and years of working myself to complete exhaustion and then collapsing for any length of time. And I think that's what happened 4 years ago, is that I just came to an absolute point of burnout. And it's taken me really 3-4 years just to get to a point of halfway functioning again. And that was because my body was telling me things, and I would shut it down. And burnout is one thing. The thing that I think is much more pernicious even than that is that I trained my mind no longer to pay attention to my body, so that I kind of cut off that signal path. And I'm in therapy. This cannot come as a surprise to you. And the question that my therapist asks me that stumps me reliably and on the regular is, where do you feel that in your body? That's always his go-to question is, I tell him a story and I go, oh, this happened, that happened, and I'm so upset. And then he says, okay, where do you feel that in your body? And it's taken me years. I've been with him for 10 years. It's taken me years to just be able to give a very basic answer of, oh, I feel like my chest is a little tight, or I feel something in my face or something. So I think that's the biggest danger of ignoring your body in these times of stress, is to sever that connection to your body. So don't do that, because there's also a lot of fun stuff you can cut off, and there's a lot of really helpful stuff you can cut off. So respect your body is what I'm saying. And check your assumptions. And this is advice for life, and it's also some concrete design advice. I'll give you some concrete design advice, because there's a lot of therapy type talk. As I was preparing the intro for this talk, I picked that song, and I was like, this is great. This is great. Like, I'm picking this song because I love that song and it means something to me. And also has a really steady beat, so I can edit the portfolio pieces to that. Quick and easy, great. Timed it all out, made a little visual click track. And I was like, this is a song from 2022. It's got a click track on it, great. And then nothing would time correctly. I would do it individually. I would do the little chunks, and I would time it, and it'd be beautiful. And then I played the whole thing, and nothing really fit. And I spent hours fiddling with the timeline. I'm like, okay, well, let me time stretch the audio. Maybe sometimes the M4V goes out of sync. The video's wrong. Maybe my RAM is not sufficient. God knows what. I was really digging everywhere. Because it's like it's on a click. Everything is evenly spaced. I even checked all the segments that they're all exactly the same length. And then finally, eventually, I was like, hang on, let me just check this. Got off my metronome and checked the song. Song's in the pocket. Song is not precise. That song was not recorded to a click. That was a real live drummer that was going in and out a little bit. So I did all my research and I did all the work on the assumption that it's based on a click track, and then edited to that, and couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. And I do that all the time. I do that in my print work. I'm like, yeah. I'm doing this thing the way that I always do it because that always works. And then problems happen and I go, why is this not working? That always used to work. And it takes a second to go, hang on, take a breath. Is the reality in front of you actually what you think it is? And then a lot of times, more often than not, it is, oh, yeah, no, shit, I completely set that up differently. There's some checkbox that I check differently, or there's a format that I set up differently. So always check your assumptions. So many times, because I love puzzles, right? As I said, I'll go in and I'm like, oh, this isn't working. It's a puzzle. Let me just go and let me fix it. And let me put layers and layers and layers of fixes on it. So many times with illustrations, with book files, I'll pile on 50 layers of fixing. And then eventually I go, it's just not as good. And then I'll redo it from scratch and it'll take me 10 minutes and it'll be better because I missed some tiny little thing at the very, very bottom. So that's what I'm talking about there. But in terms of life, it kind of goes back to point number one is, what's your why? And is the why that you determine still the correct one? And are you still on the journey that you thought you were on? So every once in a while, and again, these points are all interconnected. If you have a little bit of a buffer where you can breathe and take a moment to center yourself, it's super helpful. Because otherwise, as I, again, used to do for decades, literally, was to always be reactive and just go, fix this problem, then fix the problem right after that, fix the problem right after that, and the problem right after that, and then try to anticipate the next 5, instead of taking a breath, stepping back and saying, wait a second, am I solving the larger problem? Am I understanding the larger problem? Is there even a problem? Am I understanding what everybody's goal is? Which brings us right to number 6, ask better questions. And for me, that's always been scary. Because what was my why? I wanted people to like me. and I wanted people to love me. And I thought that being fun and making good work and being easygoing about it and being, not ever being a problem for anybody was, which I wasn't super successful at, but more about that in a second. That was my thing. I wanted people, like, I didn't realize that my fundamental mission was to get people to like me. And my assumption was that being perfect at everything I did was the way to achieve that. And so based on that, it was very scary to ask questions of clients, of the people in my life, because I thought, oh, if I ask the wrong question, then they'll think that I'm pushy, needy, weird, you name it. Blair Enns from Win Without Pitching at some point said, don't be afraid of information. And that's exactly what was happening, is I was afraid of information. And so I would make a ton of assumptions, go, well, they probably want this, or that person probably wants this from me. Let me give it to them. Instead of saying, hey, what do you want from, not even what do you want from me, but what do you want for yourself? So the way to do that is to ask questions that give you interesting information. Because when you're not clear on what you want and you're not clear what they want, it's very easy to ask questions that just maintain, I guess, homeostasis, just to keep the peace, to just keep it all fairly surface. And that doesn't really give you anything interesting to work with. So now I try to ask questions that give me interesting information. And by interesting, I mean interesting to me, right? It's your mileage will be very different than mine on certain questions. And the way I figure out what is an interesting question is, does it elevate my emotional state? Does it really excite me? Am I really excited to hear the answer? Or am I really, really scared to hear the answer? That's usually what it is. And I remember so much I realize of so much of my socialization comes from watching TV and movies. And I watched a lot of lawyer shows. And in the lawyer shows, they always say, never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to. Like, you never want to be surprised by an answer. And I thought, yeah, that's good. That's what I want. Which, of course, is great if your goal is to keep the peace and to have everything under as much control as possible, which for me was a way of feeling safe in the world. But of course, it keeps you from learning new things. If you're only asking questions where you're like, yeah, I have a pretty good idea that I'm going to get answer X. So what I'm trying to do these days is to ask questions that really scare me, where there's a real risk involved, where I go like, oh, how do you feel about this collaboration? What are you trying to do with this? Because the answer might be, the answer might lead to the point where it's clear that the answer isn't me, or the answer doesn't involve my help or my presence. And that's really scary, because a lot of times I still have my main goal as, oh, I want to be in relation with you. But if that's the truth and it's unacknowledged, who does that help? Right? So I'm kind of, I want to avoid saying I'm forcing myself, but I'm encouraging myself to ask those kinds of questions. Because if the answer is, oh, I'm not the ideal person for the situation, then the sooner everybody knows that, the better it is for everyone involved. but that can be really hard. But I think it is ultimately the most responsible thing I can do for myself, for the people I'm dealing with, for whatever project we're working on, or whatever, time is spent together, to know, do we all want the same thing? And sometimes it may seem like, oh, I'm not the answer, but it might be that I know somebody who is the answer, or it might be that I can go back to questioning the assumptions, or I can help somebody else figure out what they actually want, and maybe I can help with that. Maybe I can provide that. And again, the point is to raise awareness of what everybody wants, and then you can have a much, much better and a much more interesting conversation with people. And it may not be, the result may not be, oh, I got to use exactly the image I wanted to use, or I got to do exactly the kind of bus wrap I always wanted to do. But I think you'll have contributed to something that's a lot more positive in a relational sense. And to me, at this point, that has become so much more important. And it's scary, because there's a lot of stuff that's been kind of societally unaddressed for a really long time, and there's a lot of stuff that we're not encouraged to talk about. Money, social inequity, systemic issues, systemic racism, things like that, all things that are not pleasant to talk about. But as soon as they come out in the open, as soon as they come out into the open, then we can go, okay, that's a real thing. What do we do about that? And so I think that's a worthy goal. And I think that's worth the discomfort. Environmental things. There's so much, and it also gets really overwhelming, because once you go down that path, once you open that door, it's very hard to close it again. It's hard to become less aware once you have reached a certain level of awareness, and that can be really frightening. It can also, and it's really exhausting a lot of times. And so, oops, there's a slide missing. Why is there a slide missing? Because I was going to talk about my questions book at this point. It wasn't such a flow. All right, let's talk about the book for a minute. Because I did write a book about questions. So this quest to find interesting information isn't new for me. So I wrote this book a few years ago, that's sort of a self-assessment guide that came out of the first few years of therapy, that let people go on I call it a therapy session in a book. And so here are some sample pages. A lot of the questions are by me. Some of the questions are by people that I admire. And it's a way of basically dealing with everything I've been talking about up to this point. And the rights recently reverted back to me from Peach Pit, and so I decided to do an expanded edition through self-publishing that addresses a lot of things that people had asked me for over the years. The main thing being the book's too small. The original book was 4x6, and it was on coded stock, and so it was actually fairly hard to write in, but we tried to keep it under $20 at the time. And so I made a new edition, which now is, in fact, 5x7 and is on uncoded stock. And because it's self-publishing, it's still under $20. If you want to check it out, 344questions.com is where that is. And sorry, little production thing. I like a nice foredge when you fan the pages. So this is the last page of the original edition. What's the first thing you'll do when you close this book? Who will you talk to, and what will you make? I thought I want to not just reissue the book. I've done tons more therapy since then with a new therapist who is a Buddhist, so I want to bring a lot of that stuff into it. And so I did a whole new section that reflects all the growth I've had, hopefully growth, all the change I've had since then. And it really is, I felt like I'd stepped off a cliff. So there's your cliff right there. Sometimes I have to be literal. And I asked a lot of friends that I'd made in the last 10 years since the first edition of the book. There was Gail Anderson, who was a huge hero of mine, Chris Doe, J. Ryan Stradle, who's a novelist I love, Lauren Ibsen, who's a wonderful book designer in LA. So it's just, it's a lot of new tools, because ultimately this is sort of my mission now. I say with some trepidation because it sounds so grandiose, but it's one of the puzzles, let's say, that I'm trying to address is how do we get through life in a way that allows us some dignity and some freedom and some peace and joy. And so I'm hoping that this is at least, it's one more tool. I'm sure I'll come up with more, and I hope that you will too, because I think we all learn together. This is now the new last page of the book, which actually is the only page that diverges from the question format, because everything else in the book's questions. But the last page was actually sort of a little mini poster of what's important to me, which is to prioritize joy, to protect our sanity, and to stay safe. Which then brings us to the slide I was looking for earlier. Allow yourself hope. Because it's a weird timeline. It's a frightening and frustratingly stupid timeline. And I'm finding it very easy for myself to sink into a hole. And there are a lot of days where I'm sitting here and I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I still here? What is the purpose in this? The big things I can't change, or I can make such incremental change to that it feels pointless. There are also things about my personal life, or just about my life, where I think there are changes that would be expedient that I don't seem to be able or willing to make. And what am I doing here? And so, and as much as I try to apply all the tools that I've just given you, some days they work better than other days. And there are some things that take an enormous amount of time. Change happens, but a lot of the big changes I've found come so gradually that I only recognize them sometimes after the fact, sometimes years after the fact. I was like, oh yeah, that thing that used to be such a huge deal to you, that just fixed itself. It's glacial. And so on a day-to-day level, sometimes it's just rough. And so I would say, allow yourself hope. Because hope in those moments can feel scary. Like in hope, the presence of hope itself can feel like you're torturing yourself relative to just resigning yourself. But I think, allow yourself the hope that if you are, or when you are in a dark place, that things will change and interesting things may appear, will appear, do frequently appear, and often without any prior warning. Looking back, I've been startled how the most important people in my life just showed up. There isn't some sort of Doppler shift, like when an ambulance pulls up behind you and you hear the noise and you hear it approaching for blocks and it gets really loud and then it sort of fades. And people aren't like that. Key jobs, like signature things that become like your signature achievements, just show up with a phone call or with an email, or or somebody just says hi to you. And for those of us, such as myself, who are trained that everything good in life happens because you worked for them and you earned them in some way, and that everything good is the culmination of some sort of incremental effort. It's very hard to wrap my head. I'll just speak for myself. I find it very hard to wrap my head around random good fortune, because it seems like making a lottery win your retirement plan. But that's life. Like sometimes, people or jobs just show up. And it's easy to forget that. So I wanted to, if you are in a position where that's in your mind, I just wanted to give you some reassurance that good stuff just sometimes appears out of nowhere. And I'd said 7 things to help you make your life better, but I'll give you a bonus. Don't be Disney dad. What does that mean? Years ago, my parents came to visit me here, and my parents live in Germany, or my mom still lives in Germany. My dad has passed, sadly. But they came to visit me here, and we went to Disneyland, as one must when one lives in Los Angeles, because it's great. And we went, and it was super expensive to go. And my dad got really stressed out. He was like, well, we need to go to this ride, and we need to go here, and then you wanted to go see this, and are we seeing everything? And let's go make sure that we see as many rides as possible. Because he was attached to the ticket price, which was gone, right? The ticket was bought, the money wasn't coming back, but he was like, we need to get our money's worth. And I thought, well, did we pay the money to go on every possible ride and race around and try to maximize our time and really be the most efficient about which lines and everything? Or did we pay the money to have a great time on a sunny day hanging out at Disneyland together? I think I kind of brought him around to it. But I think about that all the time, because I get that way a lot, where it's like, oh man, like there's time short and this is so expensive. We need to get the most out of this, and we need to do this, and we like, are we maximizing it? He also used to be very, very invested in, if the hotel had a breakfast included, we had to have that breakfast because we paid for it. And he was born right after World War II, so to him, he had that scarcity mindset that came from that generation. So completely understand. And I inherited a little bit of that. So when I go into a situation now, I think don't be Disney dad. Like the point is to have fun. Alan Watts, the philosopher, talks about taking life, that you can choose to take life seriously or not. And he strongly comes down on not taking life seriously. And there are certainly moments and things and responsibilities that are serious and have to be taken seriously. But at the end of the day, whenever possible, can you not take life seriously? Or can you apply the serious taking to the things that are important? And for me, it's how much fun can I have? And how much can I love people? And that becomes the priority. And whenever I'm able to shift my mind to that perspective, my life gets better, and so does the life of everyone around me. Is to say, oh yeah, no, if I'm stuck in traffic, being late to an event, and if I'm stuck with somebody that I love being with, then it doesn't matter to me. Then I'm just like, well, my desire is to spend time with you. I had this recently. I was visiting friends and we were stuck in traffic and they were getting very, very stressed out. And I wanted to honor that and I didn't want to tell them how to feel. But in my mind, I was like, we're together. I haven't seen you in ages. This is the show. The show isn't, oh, we're late to the museum or we're spending too much time in traffic. This right here, this is the good stuff. And so that's what I mean is don't lose sight of what the show is. Bill Hicks was a comedian that I loved, who sadly passed away a long time ago and quite young, used to talk about it's just a ride. Or he said life is just a ride and there's ups and downs and it gets scary, but it's just a ride. And I try to keep that in mind. If you want to treat yourself, look that up on YouTube. It's a great riff of his. If I had to adopt a philosophy, that might be the one. So I'll close with that. And if I had a goal for myself and that I can share with you and that maybe could be a goal for you, it's generate maximum kindness. Because it's an increasingly strange timeline. And where none of us guaranteed a sunrise. And ultimately, I think what better mission is there in life than to make things a little sweeter and gentler for everyone? Because I think everyone carries their stuff. And some know it, some don't. Some know a little bit how to deal with it, some don't. But everyone's got their stuff, and I think to the degree, no, I talk too much. Generate maximum kindness. That really says it. So there you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was incredible. And that was so enlightening. So if anybody does have any questions that they want to put into the Q&A chat, we have one lined up right now. Christine, do you want to? Thanks.
Okay, so this one comes from a Peter Gorepi. I know you well enough to know you are incredibly creative and innovative. What do you do when that creativity isn't flowing? Do you have techniques, methods that kickstart the process?
That's a great question. Yes, I do. It used to scare the crap out of me because that's the job, right? So the techniques I have are to start with things that don't threaten me. I do a lot of book design now, and those are always these gigantic projects. And what I'll do is I'll say, all right, what's the size of the book? I'll go to my bookshelf and I'll just pull down books that feel right to me. And then I'll go, okay, let me, like this feels like a good size. Let me set up an InDesign document. And I'll go, okay. So now I'm already working a little bit. Well, let me maybe pick a font. Let me maybe, put a background color to it. If I have a lot of images to work with, I'll just start photoshopping those. I'll start color correcting them. This talk, I haven't given a talk in 3.5 years, 4 years, and I was a little bit terrified. I was like, oh, what do I still have to say? And so at some point I was like, well, let me put together a little opening. Let me gather some images. Let me put some type to it. That's my technique, is to just get in the door. Because where I've really gotten into trouble was what I learned in school, which was like, you have to have the idea. You have to have the idea has to drive everything. And if you haven't thought till blood streamed down your forehead from thinking so hard, then the idea isn't worth pursuing. And I think that's absolutely wrong. I think when ideas aren't just bubbling out, process is your best friend. To just start gently moving. And I remember thinking back, even when I was in junior high, I would spend hours and hours and hours drawing illustrated report covers instead of writing the report, because the report would scare me way too much. But while I was drawing and while I was illustrating and lettering and everything, my brain somewhere in the back was already working on the assignment. And then when I had spent, if I had 10 hours and I'd spent 8 hours on the cover, I just bang out the paper the last 2 hours. And one of my teachers said, it's like you're basically, you're, what is the word I'm looking for? You're saturating the solution and then you put a seed crystal in and then the crystal forms very quickly. But you've already put in all this time saturating the solution, and that's what it feels like. So that's my technique. There's also stuff like doing word clusters and mind maps. Mood boards are really nice. But it's, to me, that's all the same thing. Is what is a thing that isn't threatening to your brain, that doesn't hit you, that doesn't bring you up against that barrier of, oh shit, I have to be creative. It's just like, no, I'm just, I'm just fiddling. I'm just noodling around, because noodling around's fine. Like, noodling around's not scary. So that's my technique.
Does anyone in the room have any questions? Yes, you'll have to come up to the mic, please.
Can you talk more about how you figured out your why?
Yeah. 10 years of nonstop therapy. Few years before that. And just, you know what? And just getting older helps, which happens with relentless certainty. And I've had the buffer because I've been super conservative about my money, that I've had a few years where I didn't have to work quite as hard. And so there's a little bit of breathing room. I've also had some really deep and wonderful and nourishing relationships with friends and partners that allowed me to just pay attention to myself. And one of the things that has made a huge difference in my life is about 10 years ago, I started learning music. And I always loved music and I always wanted to make music. But I had 2 encounters with teachers that people usually have around the visual arts, where somebody told me, oh, that's not for you, you suck at this, right? And which I never had in visual arts. I always got great support, which is probably why I stuck with it. And with music, I had 2 teachers very early on that said, well, oh, you suck at this. This isn't for you, you're a visual guy. And I'm like, okay. Because if somebody tells me I suck, I'm like, oh, yes, I've always thought so. At least somebody has the honesty to say it out loud. And then 10 years ago, I was trying to win somebody back. And I was like, oh, if they're not going to fall for my bullshit anymore, I should have an ace up my sleeve. I'm going to learn a song on the guitar. And I had a guitar that I had just standing there kind of as sculpture. And then I started learning a song and I was like, oh, this feels nice. And then I started doing more of that and I started practicing more. And I've been with the same teacher for 10 years. When I find people that I love, I stick with them. And it's learning that was the first fundamentally new thing that I've learned since I was 10 years old. Because the last fundamentally new thing was learning English. Because everything else was some sort of gradual improvement of like, oh yeah, well the computer is just drawing, but with a different machine and stuff like that. And so learning music, like learning English was a really new thing. And then learning music was the first new thing. And I was learning it now at an age where I could pay attention to how I was learning. When I was 10, I was busy growing my body and learning everything everywhere all the time. So I was too busy to pay attention to any sort of process. But with music, I could go, oh, I can bang my head against this wall all night long to learn this line, and I cannot get it in my head. And then I'd go to sleep, frustrated, and the next morning I'd wake up, lo and behold, there it was. My body needed time to catch up with what I was putting in, like it needed to somehow migrate into my nerves. And so that taught, and then there also over years, I would be like, I can't get it. And then I'd look back and go, oh, you're now easily doing this thing that you were struggling with 5 years ago. And that opened my eyes to how I learn in my life and what's important to me in my life. And I try to use all parts of the buffalo in my life. And so that was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, this applies to everything. And then that allowed me to slow down and go, oh, I don't need to, not everything is a deadline. Not everything is crunch time. Not everything is, we need to do it in a sprint. And that allowed me to just step back and breathe a little bit and go, oh, what actually matters to me? Like, what is the actual thing here? And it just takes a slowness that I think we are consciously being kept from. I think that the way our system is set up and our economy and our politics are set up is such that we are forced to always be running. We're always kept in a space of, if you don't deliver on this, you're going to lose your job, you're not going to have insurance, you're going to go broke, you're aging, you're not going to be attractive enough long enough, you're not going to have the money. You gotta hustle, babe. And I think that's a very conscious system so that we never have the time to say, well, hang on. Do I have to go on every ride? Or can I just sit here and have a churro? You know? And so, yeah, so I think ultimately I finally wound my way to maybe a useful answer. It is, I found my why by creating space to slow down and actually pay attention.
So I have another question here. The event description mentioned that you just designed a new catalog for Gajin Fujita. Can you tell us about that project?
Yes, I can. And I had a whole slide deck set up for this, and then I was like, no, I want to talk about this other stuff. But are we okay on time to look at some stuff?
Yeah, it's 7:09.
All right. When do they boot us out?
We're going to break about 7:30, 7:40.
I can do this. Let me show you some stuff. Hang on. If I can find it. So I'd done a catalog for Gajin about 10, 11 years ago. And I've been working with the same gallery, LA Louvre, for 18 years now. And it was time for a new major show of his. And so they asked me back to do another catalog for him, which is always a joy because Gajin is a genius and he's a lovely and community-minded man. And it's great to be able to support artists that support other artists. And so this was the first catalog. This was the catalog from 10 years ago called Made in LA. And that tag that you see there next to my head is sort of his signature graffiti tag. He was part of a graffiti gang here in Frogtown called K2S, Kill to Succeed. And so his paintings are large boards that he has his old crew tag, and then he paints, spray paints on top of it in the sort of classic Japanese style. So for this show, True Colors, he had his first self-portrait included in the show, which is the silhouette that you're seeing there. That again has that LA tag. And so we thought we'd put that on the cover with a 3-level foil stamp. So it basically almost works like silk screen, where there's a solid silver behind everything, and then there's 2 levels of gold on top. And I'll show you some pages from the catalog. Let's see if I can, which way do I have to move to get out of the way? You know what? Let's do this. There's Gajin at work. Oh, sorry. I always love showing details in the catalog. And the catalog, by the way, I should, you know what, I'll show it to you after. Can I? Hang on. Because I have the actual catalog right here. Nope, it's upside down. Here we go. Oh, is it? It thinks it's the background. Okay. You can kind of see it. All right, enough playtime for me. And so this is the painting whence from sprang the cover. So that's all traced in Illustrator and then reborn in the catalog, on the catalog cover. And this is how he makes his pieces. So it all starts with metallic, with gold leaf that he applies to the board. So it was kind of great to have that as a cover option, or to have it recast as the cover. Here's another detail. And this thing, by the way, is like 6 by 10 feet, so they're huge. And in the catalog, one of the things we had, which you'll see a little later, is there's so much detail in these pieces. This is his studio, this is his view from his living room, and this is his home studio, which is just, he works outside under a canopy a lot because it's everything you see is spray paint. So he's always on the mask because it's toxic as hell. And this is his mom, who was a big part of the show because he also did a portrait of her. And his mom is suffering from Alzheimer's, and so a lot of the work now is also about his changing relationship to his mom. So I was very happy that we got to immortalize her in the catalog. And that's his wife Angie in the inset, because these are just screen captures from their chat sessions. By the way, for an actual design production tip, I downloaded a software called Gigapixel a few years ago, which is an absolute lifesaver for up-resing low resolution photos. So great. Another detail from one of the paintings, and this stuff, he uses fluorescent colors. Getting this ready for 4-color is brutal. What you're looking at there has, I think, 40 layers of Photoshop on it to fix everything, to get everything where it looks good on press. Insane. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is a feature we've done now for the first time in the many catalogs I've done for them, which is that the gallery interviewed Gajin about the background of each painting and the details in each painting. So this is a really wonderful behind the music kind of thing. And I'll give you a quick look at the production process. Because these paintings are so metallic, when you shoot them straight on the way you would normally shoot gallery art, to get just not unromantic color fidelity, you really kill all the metallics. So what I asked him to do on this was to reshoot all the paintings in different ways, to have lighting from different angles, so that I could then remix it all in Photoshop to get sort of a platonic ideal of the metallic and the colors, which is a huge cost to the gallery, but they were really committed to doing something spectacular. And so I'll show you the layer process. So this is the first lighting setup. This is with lighting from a different angle added. It's the third lighting setup that gets mixed in. And you can see it around the eyes, for example. Brighten the gold areas, boosted the saturation, open up the mid-range. Always open up the mid-range. This is, if you're, again, another semi-secret production tip. If you're going on press, especially with uncoated paper, but in general, if you go into images, adjust, shadow highlight. It's one of those destructive old commands that's been in there for 20 odd years that everybody's forgotten about. And it's some precursor to HDR toning, but it's just this magic little command that opens up your midtones and gives you so much more flexibility on press. It's so good and nobody remembers it. So, and let me open myself back up again. Let share. So yeah, so that's that book, and it's, I mean, and it's huge. It's heavy. And look how shiny it is. It's so shiny. And I, in all my projects, whatever, I always love doing stuff that you can't do online and that you can't do with an inkjet printer. So I always try to create something that's a little bit magical, that people can't just do it. Like you can't just do it at home. Do ask me anything. I will genuinely answer any question.
Are there any other questions in the room? I'd like to give them some attention.
Yeah, they showed up in a physical place in a physical way.
Hey, Stefan, Carl here.
Hey, Carl.
It's been 3 years, 1 month.
Is that right?
Yeah, when we were out in LA, when we visited with my wife, Kyle.
That's right.
So small world. Anyway, thank you very much. Great presentation. I wanted to ask about when you're doing book cover design, since the pricing is always in the dark ages in the industry, but it's nice to hear. What are you given from the publisher a price range of what book covers say would cost, and also interiors, or do you have to pitch for the cost?
Are you talking in terms of production cost or in terms of my cost?
Design, yeah, your cost for design. Like if they said, "Hey, we want you to design this book cover."
Yeah. By the way, also I appreciate the fact that we're both rocking the yellow, and I like your shoes.
Yes.
And your glasses, like you are a Gesamtkunstwerk.
Always.
So this is a long-standing relationship. So with them, I sometimes just send a bill at the end, like we don't even talk about money up front.
Mm-hmm.
I usually do an estimate with clients where it isn't that very special situation. I mean, sometimes I have publishers that if it's, and I mean, this is through the gallery, so this is a private client. When it's a publisher, they'll usually say, well, we usually pay X amount of dollars. And for publishers, what I've had for book covers, it tends to be in the $2,500 range if it's like a trade paperback or like a trade book or something. And then it's like another $500 for the back cover and the spine. And I don't know how people do it. I think it must just be a volume business. I get those jobs so rarely that it's kind of like a nice, like, oh yeah, sure, that'll be fun. But to do it to survive, it must be that you're churning out like 15, 20 of these every month.
Right.
this catalog, my budget was just a little over, and that's a 152 page catalog.
Mhm.
That includes pre-press work for me, so color correction stuff. That includes press supervision, so that's kind of soup to nuts. And I'm pretty happy with that. I don't know where that sits because nobody talks about that stuff.
Right.
And I get a lot of offers. It's like, oh, we're doing this self-published thing, and then they'll say, what does that kind of thing cost? And then I tell them, and I'll tell them like it's sort of 20,000 and up for me. And then usually people go, oh, sweet Jesus, and they vanish. And that's okay. And I mean, I'll sometimes, and I'll usually say, hey, listen, I understand that this isn't for everybody, and that's like, you're not really in my market segment. I'm happy to connect you to somebody. What do you have? What do you want to spend?
Right.
And sometimes they say, oh, well, we were thinking $2,000 for this book. And then I will tell them I can't recommend anybody in good conscience, because that's not a fair price for the work. You may not realize how much goes into it, because I think I'm now at the age and at the level where I can take the hit of somebody being a little bit mad at me. And I think we need to all look out for each other and go like, okay, no, that's not okay. And there's always going to be somebody who wants it bad enough, needs it bad enough, or is rich enough to just take a hit, to go like, oh yeah, sure, I'll take that. I know there are some very, very prominent firms in our business that do lowball offers. And it pisses me off, because I'm okay. Like, I'll be fine, knock on wood. But there's a lot of people coming up that are getting their prices eroded because there are titans of the industry that are giving the impression that work can be done for cheap.
Right.
So I don't know. Did I actually answer your question? I'm not sure.
No, you did. No, you did. It also comes down to most projects, because if people contact me and said, hey, we need a website design, the first thing I'll say is, you have to give me a budget range. And anybody can do a website. They can do it themselves. They can spend $500 or they can spend $50,000. But I want it to look just like the Apple site, which is a great example of like, I don't think you have a couple $1 million just to start, but we want to keep the value of our industry within reasonable perspective of what we do professionally, not go the opposite direction and do things completely. You don't go in and argue and say, I'll take that hero sandwich at the deli for less.
Right. Yeah. No, and this is where I go back to ask interesting questions, right? Because my reflex is always to lunge for the work. Right? So like, okay, I don't even need to know that much about the job. I just want it, and how much can I get for it? And what I ask now, and this again comes from Win Without Pitching, so I don't want to take credit for this, is I try to define what the value is for them. What's their why? Why do they think they need a website?
Right.
What are they trying? What I ask them is, okay, let's take a step back. You're saying you need a website. How come? What are you trying to do? And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that sounds like the kind of thing you need a website for. And sometimes it's like, oh, that actually doesn't sound like a website might be the ideal thing. Have you thought about this other thing? And when I ask them also, what are you trying to do? Then the follow-up question is, how do you know that you've achieved that? In other words, how do you measure that? And then once you can measure it, then is it possible to assign some sort of financial value to that? And then what's a fair percentage? And what I'll do now is any bid I send out 3 prices. I send out, and I check with them. It's like, if they say, well, it can't be more than $10,000. Then I go, okay, I'm going to send you some prices. I'll send you a range of prices. If one of the prices comes in at 10,000, you're able to circulate it internally and you're able to discuss it. Yes, great. And then I'll come up with a scope that fits within that. And then I'll come up with the huge, outlandish everything, soup to nuts, and and I'll throw you a parade price. And then I'll come up with something in the middle that I think actually should be done, right? Where it's like, here's the actual sort of, this is what I would do if I were you. And it's fairly shocking how often people just go for the super deluxe option, go like, oh, we want all that stuff, please, because that sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people come back and they go like, we need the minimum option, but we need all this other scope. Then I'm like, yeah, you know what? You're a price buyer. And one of the wonderful things about being on the journey of developing a sort of richer personal life is that now the time that people buy from me has become more valuable. I used to just sit here and wait for stuff. And so it was like, well, I got nothing else to do anyway, so I might as well do this. All right, well, I'll have to do it at 25% of what I asked for. Whatever, I still get to do a fun thing. So now people have to buy valuable practice time from me and valuable people time. And so now if somebody goes, yeah, I want the cheapest price and the maximum scope, I'll go, no, thanks though, no hard feelings. And genuinely, it is no hard feelings, because some people come to me and go, yeah, we've got $2,000, and I'm like, that's great. If you've decided that, that's great. I'm just not the guy. And the really fun thing that I've started really enjoying is doing it and not get emotionally upset about it. And when they get angry at prices, I get so happy when I can just sit there and be like, hey, let me help you through this. It's not personal. This is just not what I do. It's okay for you. It's okay for somebody to want to spend very little money. It's totally legitimate. I have that about stuff. And I do not miss the decades of me getting into psychological airing of grievances that have nothing to do with the client, and their grievances have nothing to do with me, and yet here we are bloodying each other's noses. And I'm so happy to not be doing that anymore.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So we're coming up on time, but is it okay if we take one more question from the audience?
Yeah, I'm here for you.
Great.
Hi, my name is Janai. I have a question. I feel like a lot of times in like colleges, because I graduated a couple years ago, they don't really address this. When you're a designer, there's like almost like 3 options for yourself. There's freelance, working in an agency, or almost like I right now work at the state and do marketing and graphic design. So it's a little different from a small town like mom and pop shop. So out of those 3 options, what would you say was the most fulfilling in your career? I'm not sure if you tried all 3 or if you've only tried one.
And what was the last one you said, working for the state?
Yeah, like a government job. So a government designer versus like a local business or a freelance. So which one would you find the most fulfilling?
Yeah. For me, it was always freelance, because that's how I started. Also, I mean, I started working on commercial jobs when I was in high school. Like I started getting stuff printed when I was like 12. And so I was just used to, by the time I got out of college, I was just used to, oh, I'll do a little here, I'll do a little there. I did work 2 staff jobs. I worked at the ad agency, and then I worked at Maverick Records for a while. And those were still sort of project-based jobs, but it felt very slow moving to me. And it was also, it felt very emotionally unsafe and taxing because you're with the same people all the time and you don't really have a choice. And whenever I would have a client where the relationship was just bad, there was an out. There was usually the project would end and then we would just not do anything else. Or in the worst cases, you could quit. You lose a lot in terms of financial security, in terms of healthcare and all that kind of stuff, which is, our delightful American system. I liked the freedom, and I also liked that I could go travel without having to ask anybody. I like being able. I've been living this. What you're looking at here is the only place I've lived in America except for a year in Portland. I've been doing all my work in this room for 30 years. I like it here. My view is amazing. I like looking out at California when I work. And when I had to go into an office, it wasn't for me. And I also I can do a lot of self-generated stuff. And so much of the process is what the Germans call staring holes into the air, just waiting for some idea to come. And I found it very hard in a staff job to have to do performative work, to look like I'm working. Bill Hicks, the comedian that I mentioned before, had a little thing where he was working a staff job and his boss said, "Hicks, you're not working." I said, "Well, I have nothing to do." He said, "Well, pretend you're working then." And Bill Hicks says, "Why don't you pretend I'm working? And then we're both happy." And so, freelance is the short answer for me.
Okay, I like that answer. You kind of motivated me. I'm very early in my career, so I'm trying to figure out where I want to go because I realize the position I'm in now, I don't like it as much. It's not as fulfilling. So that was a good answer.
And I'll thank you for giving me that background, because based on that, I'll tell you something else. I did the 2 years of staff work to learn the ropes, to make production mistakes on somebody else's dime. And it helps to have a staff job to start laying some track for the freelance thing, because it does take time for work to show up. And make yourself, I don't know to what degree you're already doing it, make yourself as visible as possible. Because it's the definite biggest weak point of my practice is how to generate work. I suck at it. And the only way that I found that works is make a ton of work and put it on the website, put it on social media, put it everywhere, show it to friends. Dribbble hasn't done shit for me. Instagram hasn't done shit for me. All this stuff, recruiters, nothing has ever worked for me, but to talk to people and to show people the stuff. But it's been great. I've been super, super grateful for my career, and I'm still super grateful for my career. And at the end of every year, every time I do my taxes, I'm like, holy shit, that worked out again in another year. I don't know how, but it worked. So good luck with it.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
Sure.
All right, thanks so much. And on behalf of the AIGA Connecticut chapter, we'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight's event, Professor Hastings and Quinnipiac University for hosting us, our helpful volunteers for the evening, Connor Gravel, Jenny Reed, and Shayla Hill, and special thanks to Stefan Bucher for his time and amazingly inspiring presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.